So here we see that we've exposed the data model of the list of movies that we're storing in the database. We like to expose that to the client that we had that we wrote earlier, right? So if we go back to that application, that React application, notice that we're only actually interacting only with the OMDB API, right? We never interacted with our own API. Right? And there's nothing stopping us from interacting with both of them, right? So for instance, what we could do here is that not only can we display maybe the search component, we're displaying the details of a movie from a remote server. We can also display all the movies that we've liked. Right? Certainly we could do that. So for instance, we can have here perhaps in a different JavaScript here, we can say maybe all the movies that I've liked so far, right? So we can say maybe liked movies, and this would be maybe a list for me, right? And it would be a different list for you, right? So we might need to have like a relationship of saying who likes what, like a mapping table. But let's not get that ambitious. Let's just keep track of this list of movies, right? So in this component, what we can do real quick is do the following, right? We can say import React from React, and in here we can say class. So there's an alternative syntax. Instead of using class, there's another syntax which is much more terse. Instead, this could be just a simple function, also called liked movies. So this is an alternative syntax. There's an alternative syntax of instead of using a class, you can also just use a plain old function. And whatever this function returns is what gets rendered. Right? So if I return here, if I say return H2 here and movies I like, okay, and then I expose this, export this, the default liked movies, right? And in my search component, perhaps I can add a separate TD here and display all the movies that I like. We can say liked movies, right? If I go to my React, notice that now I have three columns, right? 3 columns: the movie details and the movies that I like, and maybe change that to an H1 as well, also H1. There we go. So we have the movie details, right, and then the movies that I like. So the movies that I like is perhaps the movies that come from my API, right? These are the movies coming from the remote API from somebody else's database, and these are movies that come from my database, right, and display them here. So let's do that next. All right. So in the React here, what we could do is fetch the movies. The problem with using these liked movies is that we have no access to any of our lifecycle methods. We don't have a way for us to be notified that, hey, it's a good time for us to go fetch data. Instead, oftentimes these functions are referred to as stateless components that don't maintain any current state. They entirely depend on folks providing it the data from outside, right? So for instance, the only way for me to render anything here is if somebody passes me the data that I want to render. So presumably here somebody's going to pass me the liked movies. Presumably it's an array that somebody fetched that they're providing to me. Yes? And then I can iterate through it in here, right? So I can't do it. Only my parents or somebody who's stateful can do that. In this case would be somebody would pass in the liked movies here, liked movies, and pass me this dot state the liked movies, right, which don't exist right now, right? They don't exist right now, okay? And we can initialize it to be an empty array at first, right? It could be an empty array at first, but we can go fetch those things in here in the component mount. We can fetch that, right? Instead, just like we can fetch it from somebody else's API, we can fetch it from our own API, right? The one we just created. right? This will be something like fetch. Our URL is what? What's our URL? It's this one right here, no? Right here. So I'm just going to copy that, and that's our URL. Right, there it is. Paste there. There we go. And then this is the response coming from our server. We're going to parse it just like we did before, right? And then we can set the state. So presumably these are the movies, the actual movies that I like, right? And we can set the state. We can say this dot set state, right? And the liked movies are the movies that come back from my server. Yes? Right? Once we do that, the liked movies has changed, and it's going to be fed into my brand new liked component. Right? There it is. It's going to be updated, and my liked movies can now render it. In here, we can render it. We can say div here, and we can render this. We can say render the liked movies inside of a UL. So this might be a UL. And iterate over this liked movies, run through the map of each one of the movies, and return an LI whose title will be movie.title, and the key will be movie.imdb, IMDb ID. All right, let's see. It didn't quite work. Let's see what happened. Let's inspect, see if something failed. Okay, we got an error in the console. Access denied. Okay, so let's deal with this with CORS.